Thank you, Simran. Thank you, Kalen and Steven for Bible reading. मी सर्वात प्रथम देवबापाचे आभार मानते की त्यांनी मला ही संधी दिलेली आहे की रुथ या जुन्या कराराच्या पुस्तकातून बोलण्याची. त्याबद्दल मी देवाचे आभार मानते आणि तसेच सोफिया राज आणि अजय दादा आणि मनीषा यांचे मी आभार मानते. वचनात जाण्याच्या अगोदर मी 2 शब्दाची प्रार्थना करते. आपण प्रार्थना करू. पवित्र 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 सर्वनिष्ठ देवपा, या रात्रीच्या सुंदर वेळेत तुझ्या चरणाजवळ येण्यास तुम्हाला सहाय्य मदत केलेला आहेस, आपण तुझे उपकार मानते देवपा. पिता पुत्र पवित्र आत्मा मी तिघांना इथे आमंत्रित करत आहे. जे काय देवपा तू मला वचनातून बोलण्याची संधी दिलेली आहे देवपा, तू माझ्या मुखाला स्पर्श कर देवपा. माझे मनचे विचार नसावे तर देवपा ते सर्व वचन तुझ्याकडून येणार असा वास्तू कर देवपा. आणि सर्व देवपा मी JOV फॅमिली तुझ्या हाती देत आहे आणि देवपा हे वचन देवपा 100% फळ आणणारा असा वास्तू कर. आम्हा सर्वांची देवपा अंतकरणे मने तुझ्याकडे लागलेली असावी असते. सर्व देवपा अडखळणी तू काढून टाक. इथून पुढची सर्व मी तुझ्या हाती सोपवून देते. तुझ्याच प्रिय आणि गोड नावाने मागतो नाही देवपा. आमेन. Book of Ruth. Introduction. Book of Ruth was written by the prophet Samuel. Exact date the book of Ruth was written is uncertain. However, the prevalent view is a date between 1011 and 931 BC. Why is the book of Ruth important? The book of Ruth offers readers great insight into the importance of women to Israel's history and the strength found in steadfast love. While Ruth is an outsider, Moabite, she is still celebrated as a part of God's movement. Quick overview. To start out, a woman by the name of Naomi packed up and moved from Judah to Moab due to a terrible famine that was affecting her family. She and her husband Elimelech moved there with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died and she was left with her 2 sons, who eventually took wives. While living in Moab, the name of one was Opha and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died. Broken and empty, Naomi decided to move back to Bethlehem in Judah. Thank you, Raj, for the slides. Sorry, I forgot about it. Let me tell a bit of information about Ruth. While preparing for sermon, I watched the Ruth movie, the olden version. In this movie, it was pictured that Moabites were idol worshippers. They used to sacrifice children to their god Chemosh. And Ruth was also brought as a sacrifice to this god. And on the day of sacrifice, Ruth develops rashes. So instead of her, other child is sacrificed, and Ruth spends her life worshipping this god until she marries Naomi's son Mahlon. After marriage, she encounters with true and living God of Israel. Going back to Naomi's decision to move back to Bethlehem in Judah. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house." In verse 9, the Lord grant that you may find a home, each of you, in the house of her husband. Ruth came with Naomi, since she had also lost her husband. Keep in mind, Ruth was a Moabite woman. She was now moving to Judah as a foreigner. This was a big deal in their culture, but she was committed to Naomi as a daughter-in-law, and she wanted to follow after the God of Israel. While in Judah, God worked out an amazing plan for a man named Boaz to take Ruth as his wife, give her a child, and provide a kinsman redeemer to take her as his wife. So I'm just going to concentrate on Ruth's few characters. Ruth, a virtuous woman. What made Ruth a virtuous woman? Ruth was a foreigner. Ruth dedicated her life to her mother-in-law and her mother-in-law's faith, even when she saw nothing in it for herself. Ruth was a faithful and virtuous character. God blessed and provided her with a wonderful husband. Becoming a woman of virtue. Many times, when we hear the word virtue, we immediately think of the Proverbs woman. However, in the book of Ruth, we find out that she is considered one of the Bible's virtuous women as well. In fact, Boaz, the man who became her husband, is the one that calls her a virtuous woman. What a compliment! One of the highest compliment any woman could receive. Boaz says in Ruth chapter 3:11, "And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman." In this word, not only did Boaz realize that Ruth was a virtuous woman, but apparently the whole city knew her as a virtuous woman. What a testimony! Obviously, sorry, Ruth was a woman who carried the reputation of a virtuous woman, and thankfully, this short Old Testament book named after her gives us a glimpse at a very crucial time in her life. Let's take a few more minutes to dig a bit deeper and take a closer look at Ruth's character by following her radiant example. May we become virtuous women as well. After studying through the book of Ruth, we can learn quite a bit about Ruth's characters. I have handpicked 6 of Ruth's glowing traits. Let's look at it, each one of them. Ruth is loyal and devoted. In Ruth chapter 1, 16, verse 16 to 17, it says, "And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." So in this verse we can see Ruth was extremely loyal to her mother-in-law Naomi. These days, mother-in-laws are often looked upon with a bit of disdain, but not so with Ruth. She obviously loved Naomi very much and held her in high regard. Ruth grew up in Moab, married into a Jewish family, and was then left a widow. When Naomi decided to return to the Jewish city of Bethlehem, she encouraged her two daughters-in-law to remain in Moab. Naturally, most young women would probably choose to stay in the place of their birth with their families, but not Ruth. She wanted to remain with Naomi for the rest of her life. Ruth was loyal and dedicated to Naomi, even when it meant forsaking everything she had ever known. By following Naomi to Bethlehem, she said goodbye to her home, her family, her friends, her birthplace, and her religion. What a sacrifice she made. Ruth's exemplary loyalty and dedication to Naomi is the first of shining qualities we see in her life. The second quality, second slide please, Raj. Ruth was initiative. In Ruth chapter 2, verse 2, it says, "And Ruth, the Moabites, said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter." Once Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, they had very few provisions. Naomi, being much older, would not have near as much strength and energy to go out and glean in the fields. Ruth, however, was able, and she was willing. She go out and glean in the fields. She was the one who approached Naomi asking for permission to go out to the fields and glean ears of corn. She took the initiative. She was diligent and humble enough to go out and glean as one who was poor and needy. Ruth's initiative is going out to the fields to glean should be commended. She was a stranger in the foreign place. She was humble enough to work for what they needed, and she was looking out for Naomi as well. Ruth was diligent. She had the initiative to go out and work to help Naomi. Not only was she willing to get the work started, she worked until the task was complete. The third character, Ruth was a hard worker. In Ruth chapter 2, verse 17 says, So she gleaned in the field until even and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Ruth had the initiative to go out and work, and she was diligent enough to complete the task. Ruth worked until the day was done. It's likely that Ruth was not accustomed at all to this kind of work. Previously, she would have had a husband to care for her physical needs. Now she's the one working hard to provide for herself and Naomi. It's very hot in Israel, and fields would not have been shaded. The work that Naomi had to do must have been very hard, hot and tiresome. But she continued on until the evening, until there was enough of food for her and Naomi. How about you? I must admit that I do not like hot, hard, and laborious work. I prefer working indoors. However, whatever work we need to do, we ought to go about it with the determination and dedication that Ruth showed out in the fields. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10 says, Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do it with thy might. This is a good verse to live by. When it comes to the tasks and jobs that we need to do, whether it's something small that you do every day or an unpleasant job that must be done, do with all your might until the job is done. Other character, other side, please, Raj. In this slide, we can see Ruth was humble and thankful. Ruth chapter 2, verse 10 says, Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, Miss Boaz, why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldst of me, seeing I am a stranger? When Boaz came to his fields, he noticed Ruth working among the others, not knowing who she was. He asked about her. Then he approached her with a gracious offer. He told Ruth to remain in his fields and not to go to any other field except his. Here she would be safe, untouched, and unharmed by the men in his fields. He also told her that she was allowed to drink of the fresh water his men brought to the fields. What was Ruth's response to Boaz's generosity? She bowed herself to the ground, a sign of humility, and asked why he was being so kind to her. She showed humility and gratitude with her actions. May we work on becoming women who are truly humble and thankful of the blessings of God and generosity shown to us through others. Next slide, please, Raj. Other character, Ruth was bold and obedient. In Ruth chapter 3, verse 6 to 7. And Ruth said unto Naomi, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do. Not she went, and she went down unto the threshing floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz has eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. After a few months of gleaning in the Boaz field, Naomi approached Ruth with a bold idea. She gave Ruth instructions to anoint herself, put on special clothing, and go to Boaz's threshing floor. It was the time of year that the barley harvest was coming to an end, and all the workers of the field would be celebrating a successful harvest. Naomi knew that Boaz and many others would be at the threshing floor that night. She instructed Ruth not to show herself until Boaz had plenty to eat and drink. Then she was to follow him to the place where he would lie down to sleep. At that time, Ruth was to uncover his feet and lay down right there. This may sound like a crazy plan to most of you, and most likely Ruth thought so too. But there was a very important message behind this particular action. Boaz was Naomi and Ruth's kinsman redeemer. Let me explain a bit of about kinsman redeemer. What is kinsman redeemer? Uh, in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 to 11, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies, the wife of the dead shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in to her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his brother who is dead, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. So that's what kinsman redeemer means. A close relative was eligible to marry and provide for a widow. By uncovering Boaz's feet, Ruth was requesting that Boaz cover her under the protection of his robe, protect and provide for her as his wife. What a vulnerable request. By following Naomi's advice, Ruth was literally asking Boaz to marry her. And what did Ruth do? And she went down onto the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. What obedience and what boldness. Proverbs 28:1 says that the righteous are bold as a lion. Ruth was displaying righteousness by being bold enough to follow her mother-in-law's advice. What an example for us to follow. We usually shy away from things that make us vulnerable. We like to be comfortable, but sometimes we need to be obedient and bold enough to do the uncomfortable things that God asks us to do. And you know what? Ruth was rewarded because of her obedience and boldness. Next character of Ruth was redeemed. Next slide, please. Ruth chapter 4, verse 9 to 10. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon the inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. So Boaz took Ruth and she was his wife in Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. Boaz was willing to make Ruth his wife. He redeemed her. This is a beautiful picture of what Christ does for us. Jesus Christ has redeemed us with his shed blood. He has bought us and now he provides for us and protects us as his own. Have you been redeemed by Christ? All we need to do is realize that we are sinners in need of a Redeemer. And then by faith we accept what He has done for us on the cross of Calvary. By accepting Christ as our Savior, He redeems us, makes us His own, and will take us to heaven when we die. What a wonderful truth! What redemption! What a wonderful Savior He is. On conclusion, my final thoughts are Ruth was a foreigner who dedicated her life to her mother-in-law and her mother-in-law's faith, even when she saw nothing in it for herself. Because of her faith and virtuous character, God blessed and provided her with a wonderful husband. But that's not all. Ruth and Boaz were blessed with a son named Obed. Obed eventually had a grandson named David, the king of Israel, the man after God's own heart. Jesus Christ came through the line of David and Ruth. Being the great grandmother of David is named in the royal genealogy of Christ. Ruth followed her Naomi, and Naomi is God in faith, and as a result, she was abundantly blessed. So, how can I apply all these characters in my life? We can to become a virtuous woman like Ruth. She left us a radiant example of faith and virtue. Remember, Ruth was loyal and dedicated, initiative, hardworking, humble and thankful. Ruth was bold and obedient, and she was redeemed. Thank you.